Welcome to tonight's sleep story. Let's drift into a soothing story together as you begin your journey into a restful and rejuvenating sleep. Imagine the soft flicker of candlelight casting long shadows across a grand stone chamber. The air is cool, and a slight draft sneaks in through the crevices of the towering castle walls. Standing before the window, Queen Eleanor gazes out at the sprawling landscape below, a land that will soon be shaped by her hands. Though she is but one figure in a world teeming with kings, knights, and nobles, her eyes reveal the weight of power she holds and the secrets she keeps hidden. Voice, calm and steady, speaks. It was not always the case that women like Eleanor of Aquitaine could wield power in the way she did. Born into a world dominated by men, where marriages were contracts, and alliances were often formed in the name of survival, Eleanor was destined for greatness, though her path would not be easy. From the moment she was born, her fate was intertwined with the shifting tides of European politics. Her beauty, her intelligence, and her ambition made her a figure of interest, but it was her mind and her ability to understand the workings of power that would define her legacy. As the voice continues, you are transported to Eleanor's early life, a time when she was not yet a queen, but a young noblewoman, keenly aware of the political games surrounding her. In the grand courts of her family, she was trained not only in the arts of diplomacy, but in the intricate dance of power, how to make alliances, how to break them, and most importantly, how to wield influence without raising suspicion. The land of Aquitaine, her inheritance, was one of the richest and most powerful regions in France, and Eleanor, though young, was already aware of the potential it held. Her marriage to King Louis VII of France was not born out of love, but out of necessity, an arrangement designed to solidify power and expand influence. As a young queen, Eleanor would find herself caught between the religious and political expectations of her role and her own fierce desire for autonomy. She soon realized that the title of queen did not grant her freedom, but rather placed her under the scrutiny of courtly life and its endless demands. The voice softly reflects, in the courts of France, Eleanor quickly learned the reality of her position. She was not just a woman who had married a king. She was a political tool, an asset to be used for alliances, and a symbol of France's growing power. But Eleanor was no ordinary queen. She had ambitions far beyond the confines of her marriage, and she would stop at nothing to carve out a space for herself in the male-dominated world of medieval Europe. In the distance, the bells toll, signaling the start of a new day. The sun rises over the sprawling French countryside, casting golden rays over the land that will soon be ruled not just by kings, but by a queen whose influence would shape the course of history. You can feel the weight of her resolve, the sense that this young woman, born into a world where women were often seen as little more than pawns, would rise to become one of the most powerful figures of her time. This is where Eleanor's story truly begins, the voice says, at the crossroads of power, gender, and ambition. Her journey would be fraught with challenges, political intrigue, and personal loss. But through it all, she would remain steadfast in her desire to shape the world according to her own vision. Eleanor's marriage to King Louis VII was a union of convenience, an alliance forged through necessity rather than love. But even from the start, It was clear that Eleanor's mind was sharp and her ambitions stretched far beyond the role expected of a queen. As she sat beside Louis at court, surrounded by the trappings of wealth and power, she felt the weight of her position, but also the limitations it imposed. The title of queen did not grant her the freedom she craved. Instead, it bound her to a life of ritual, duty, and compromise. The voice continues, calm and steady, guiding you deeper into Eleanor's internal struggle. To be queen was not merely to hold a title. It was to walk a narrow path between obedience and power, tradition and change. Eleanor, with her fierce intelligence and unyielding spirit, would soon realize that the only way to wield the true power of a queen was to understand the delicate dance of politics. In this world, loyalty was both a gift and a weapon. One wrong step, one misplaced trust, and everything could unravel. As you imagine her sitting at the royal court, Eleanor's eyes scan the room, each nobleman and woman around her playing a part in the political theater of the time. While Louis VII focused on matters of religion and his own faith, Eleanor's mind was consumed with the intricacies of European politics, alliances, and the shifting balance of power. Her marriage, though a strategic one, was quickly becoming a cage-gilded prison where her desires and intellect were often left stifled beneath the weight of her husband's religious piety. There were whispers, subtle as they were, that Eleanor's marriage to Louis was not built on mutual respect. The king's devotion to religion often placed him at odds with Eleanor's own more pragmatic, worldly vision of power. She would often watch as Louis led his army on crusades, leaving her behind. In a foreign court, helpless and far from the influence she sought to have. The voice speaks again, the tone now more reflective. Eleanor, though caught in the constraints of her marriage, began to realize something. Her path to true power was not going to be through her husband's approval. She would need to carve out her own space in the world, create her own alliances, and be the architect of her own destiny. In this moment, Eleanor's frustrations began to build. She no longer wanted to be a mere passive figure in her marriage, a tool used for political convenience. She saw the world around her and the men who ruled it, each vying for control, each jockeying for position, and she knew that if she was to have any real influence, she would need to take matters into her own hands. But as she contemplated her situation, a thought arose. Could she ever truly achieve the power she craved within the confines of her marriage to Louis? Could her role as queen ever truly represent who she was, or was it time to break free from the bonds that tied her to him? Eleanor was now at a crossroads. Her marriage, though politically valuable, felt like a trap. She felt her true potential slipping away, trapped in a court where religion and duty were valued above all else. To the outside world, she was the perfect queen, beautiful, regal, and dutiful, but in her heart, Eleanor longed for more. She longed for the kind of power that didn't require her to bend to her husband's will. The voice, almost as a whisper, adds, Eleanor was no ordinary queen. She had the heart of a ruler, the intellect of a strategist, and the ambition of a conqueror. And the more she felt confined by Louis' piety, the more determined she became to break free from the chains of her royal cage. Eleanor's frustration with her marriage reached a tipping point as the days turned into years. She watched as Louis, consumed by his religious duties, led his crusades, leaving her behind, shackled by the constraints of court life. She felt like a shadow in a gilded cage, surrounded by power but unable to fully grasp it. The dreams of influence, of shaping history, began to crystallize into a determination that could no longer be ignored. The voice speaks softly, yet with a sense of inevitability. Eleanor knew that the life she envisioned could not be achieved within the confines of her current marriage. She had been raised with the knowledge that power was a tool to be wielded, not something to be surrendered. In her heart, she carried the ambition of a ruler, and it was clear that if she were to have the life she desired, she would need to break free of the chains that bound her. Eleanor's longing for control over her own fate grew into a quiet determination. She began to realize that her position in court, though high, would never allow her the kind of agency she desired unless she took bold steps. A queen without her own voice, without a space to carve her influence, was still a subject of the men who controlled the kingdom. But Eleanor, ever sharp, began to see the cracks in her marriage, the places where she could maneuver to regain. Power. Her chance came when the political tides shifted, and Eleanor found herself at a crossroads. She realized that her destiny was not tied to her husband's will, but to her own decisions. She began to seek out new alliances, not just in France, but beyond, in the courts of Europe. Through her sharp intellect and political savvy, Eleanor began to build a network of loyal supporters, each one a vital part of her future plan. The voice continues, its tone filled with quiet resolve. It is often in moments of struggle that the seeds of change are sown. Eleanor's desire for control, once born out of frustration, had now transformed into a force of its own. She no longer saw herself as a pawn in the game of power. She saw herself as a player in her own right, capable of shifting the balance of power in her favor. One fateful day, Eleanor made a decision that would forever change the course of her life. She decided to seek an annulment from Louis VII. It was a daring move, one that shocked the court and sent ripples through the political landscape, but Eleanor was resolute. She understood the implications of her actions, but she also understood that without taking this step, her future would remain bound by the same constraints. She could no longer live in the shadow of her husband's influence. She had to step into the light, even if it meant risking everything she had built. The voice pauses, as if allowing this moment to sink in. To break free of a marriage, especially one so politically significant, was a dangerous move. But Eleanor was not afraid of danger. She had already learned that the greatest risks often yield the most powerful rewards. Eleanor's decision to seek an annulment not only shifted her position within the French court, but also sent a message to the rest of Europe. Eleanor was not to be underestimated. She was not simply the wife of a king. She was a force in her own right, and she would stop at nothing to take control of her destiny. With the annulment, Eleanor found herself once again free to pursue the future she had longed for, free to forge new alliances and redefine her role in the world. With the annulment of her marriage to Louis VII, Eleanor's life entered a new and uncharted phase. She had broken free from the chains that once confined her, but with her newfound freedom came a need to secure her place in a volatile political world. It was not enough to simply seek freedom. Eleanor knew she needed power, and the only way to maintain that power in a world dominated by men was through a strategic marriage. The voice, now soft but filled with purpose, continues. Eleanor understood the game of politics far too well to stand alone in a world that measured a woman's value by her connections. Her ability to align herself with powerful men was a dangerous prospect. She needed more than just independence. She needed an ally, a partner who could help her solidify her position, someone who could elevate her and make her, once again, a force to be reckoned with. Her thoughts turned to Henry, Duke of Normandy, and soon to be King of England, a man whose ambition and power matched her own. His kingdom was expanding rapidly, and Eleanor recognized that an alliance with him would give her access to England's immense power and resources. Henry, a man of action, shared many of Eleanor's goals, though their relationship would not be without its challenges. Their shared ambition would set the stage for a partnership that would shake the very foundations of Europe in an unprecedented move. Eleanor married Henry II, cementing an alliance that would unite the vast territories of France and England under their rule. The marriage, though politically advantageous, was not without its emotional complexity. Eleanor, though fiercely independent, found herself once again in a union defined by political maneuvering, but this time she was not the passive partner. She had control, she had chosen this path, and she would use her newfound position to influence the course of history. The voice continues, its tone now reflective. In marriage, as in politics, Eleanor knew that power was never given freely. It had to be seized. And with Henry, she had seized an opportunity unlike any other. They were two of the most powerful figures in Europe, their partnership poised to shape the future. But even in the midst of this grand alliance, Eleanor remained wary. She knew that with power came its own set of dangers, and her journey was far from over. The days following their marriage were filled with both promise and peril. The union between Eleanor and Henry united two powerful kingdoms, but their relationship was far from perfect. Henry was ambitious and fiercely independent, often at odds with Eleanor's desire to maintain her own political influence. While the marriage offered her access to power, it also brought its own set of challenges. The complexity of their relationship became clear. Two strong-willed individuals, both seeking control, both determined to shape the course of history, but unable to fully reconcile their ambitions. As Eleanor navigated the intricacies of this new political landscape, she began to take on a more active role in the affairs of both France and England. She was not simply a queen consort. She was a queen who understood the delicate balance of power. She was an intelligent, capable woman who would not be relegated to the sidelines. With Henry's support, Eleanor was able to exert influence over important decisions and navigate the turbulent waters of court politics, all the while maintaining her position as one of the most powerful women in Europe. The voice pauses, allowing you to reflect. This was Eleanor's world now, a world where power was won and lost, and where she would stop at nothing to hold on to her hard-earned influence. She was no longer a passive figure. She was an active player, a force to be reckoned with. And with Henry by her side, she knew that together they would shape the future of Europe. As the years passed, the once passionate and promising union between Eleanor and Henry II begins to fray. Their shared ambition, once the foundation of their partnership, now fuels their rivalry. The complexities of ruling two vast, conflicting kingdoms, France and England, bring their differences to the forefront. While Eleanor continues to wield significant political influence, her role as a mother grows more prominent, and the tensions between her maternal instincts and her political desires start to collide. Now, reflecting the complexity of Eleanor's life continues. Power, once so clear and tangible, is now clouded by the demands of motherhood, the fierce desire to see her sons ascend to the throne, and the political maneuvering that is required to maintain her status. Eleanor had borne children to Henry, children who were meant to inherit the throne and expand her influence. But with each new heir, her relationship with Henry grows more strained. It is a delicate balance, a dance between family and politics, one that will soon lead to a conflict no one could have foreseen. Eleanor's desire to see her sons claim power intensifies as Henry's own ambitions grow more unpredictable. As her sons mature, especially Richard and John, Eleanor begins to see the potential for their future reigns. But their paths to power are fraught with conflict, especially with Henry's growing distrust of their mother's influence. Henry, a king whose own ambition often placed him at odds with his queen, becomes more determined to consolidate his power. Even if it means diminishing Eleanor's role in the court, her relationship with Henry deteriorates as their sons, Richard, the ambitious warrior, and John, the cunning manipulator, begin to vie for their father's attention. Eleanor sees her sons as the key to securing her legacy and ensuring the survival of the power she fought so hard to attain. Yet her position as their mother also places her in direct opposition to Henry, who feels increasingly threatened by her influence. Their once harmonious rule is now teetering on the edge of rebellion, with Eleanor caught in the crossfire. The voice continues, now tinged with a sense of inevitability. The very ambition that once united Eleanor and Henry now drives them apart. It is not just a battle for land, titles, and power. It is a battle for control over the future, a battle in which Eleanor is forced to take a stand. Her role as a mother has become a political weapon, and the struggle for her sons' futures now becomes the stage upon which she must fight to maintain her influence. In a bold move, Eleanor aligns herself with her sons in a political rebellion against Henry. She sees this as her only opportunity to reclaim her place in the shifting political landscape of Europe. The conflict that arises from her decision is swift and powerful, as Eleanor and Henry's once shared dreams splinter into political opposition. Henry, ever the tactician, is unwilling to relinquish power even to his queen. But Eleanor, ever resilient, refuses to be sidelined, and her actions mark a dramatic turning point in her life and the future of her children. The voice softens, as if to reflect the weight of Eleanor's choices. Eleanor's rebellion is not one of anger, but of necessity. She had no choice but to fight for the future of her sons, for the future of her own legacy. In a world where women were often relegated to the sidelines, Eleanor had fought her way to the center of power. She would not lose that position without a fight. The rebellion is not just political, it is deeply personal. Eleanor must now navigate the delicate balance of family loyalty, her political ambitions, and the undeniable reality that Henry's distrust of her has reached its peak. As her sons prepare to challenge their father, Eleanor must carefully weigh the costs of supporting them, knowing that the path she has chosen may lead to more than just political consequences. It may tear apart the family she fought so hard to protect that. As the rebellion between Eleanor and Henry II intensifies, so does the fracture within their once powerful union. The political machinations and shifting alliances within their family and court come to a head when Henry, feeling threatened by Eleanor's influence and the growing power of their sons, makes a drastic move. In an effort to neutralize her, he has Eleanor imprisoned, marking a dark chapter in her life. Locked away in the castle of Salisbury, Eleanor's physical freedom is stripped away, but her indomitable will remains unbroken. The voice, now soft but full of depth, reflects on this moment. Imprisonment is not just a physical constraint, it is a test of the spirit. Eleanor, once a queen free to move across the courts of Europe, now finds herself confined within stone walls. But even in the darkness of this imprisonment, her mind remains sharp, her resolve unshaken. For Eleanor, captivity was but another challenge, one she would confront with the same tenacity that had brought her power. Inside the cold, damp castle, Eleanor's thoughts often drifted back to her sons, the children she had nurtured, the future she had envisioned for them. She had supported their rise, and now, in the solitude of her confinement, she would rely on the strength she had always carried within her to help them fulfill their destinies. The walls may have confined her body, but they could not imprison her mind. As she sat in her cell, her heart remained fiercely tied to her sons' futures, to the political landscape she had carefully crafted. But even as she sat in silence, Eleanor knew that time was on her side. The very act of imprisoning her, while a desperate move on Henry's part, was also a testament to her power. He saw her as a threat, and in doing so, he acknowledged her influence. This realization gave Eleanor a quiet strength. The longer she remained confined, the more her legacy would grow in her sons' hearts. The world may have thought her silenced, but she knew that her absence only magnified her significance. The voice continues. With a sense of empathy, it was during these long months of imprisonment that Eleanor's true resilience came to the fore. She was not simply enduring, she was planning, thinking, and waiting for the moment when she would once again take control of her destiny. The darkest hour, it seemed, was simply the time before the dawn. In time, her son Richard, emboldened by her wisdom and his own ambition, began to challenge his father's authority more openly. Richard's actions, though fueled by his own political desires, were also a reflection of the lessons he had learned from his mother: how to fight for power, how to endure, and how to reclaim what was rightfully his. The flames of rebellion that had once been stoked by Eleanor's discontent now found a fierce and passionate advocate in her son. The voice now becomes reflective, with a sense of hope rising. Eleanor's captivity was not her defeat. It was a time of quiet fortification. Even as she sat behind stone walls, she knew that her sons, especially Richard, would rise to challenge Henry. The rebellion that had once been hers would now be carried on by them. and she would not have to fight it alone. For Eleanor, the waiting was not in vain. It was a strategic pause before the next move in the game of power. Her release after more than a decade of confinement was nothing short of a triumph. It was not just her physical freedom that was regained, but her political influence. The events surrounding her imprisonment only served to further solidify her legacy. She had become a symbol of resilience and strength, a woman who had survived not just the betrayal of her husband, but the confines of her own circumstances. Now, as she was freed, she returned not as a passive figure, but as a queen with renewed power and determination. After years of captivity, Eleanor's release was as much a symbol of her enduring strength as it was a moment of victory. The imprisonment had not broken her. Instead, it had sharpened her resolve and deepened her understanding of the power dynamics that ruled her world. Eleanor returned to the political arena not as a queen in waiting, but as a force to be reckoned with. Her absence had only served to elevate her stature in the eyes of her allies and enemies alike. The quiet power she had nurtured during her years of imprisonment began to radiate, and as she re-entered the world, it was clear that her influence had only grown. The voice, now soft yet filled with awe, says, Eleanor had been imprisoned, but she was never truly defeated. The time away from the courts and the political games had given her something that others did not have: perspective. She knew that in politics, time was just as powerful as action. And now, with her sons rising to prominence, she would play a crucial role in shaping their futures, in restoring their claim to the throne, and in securing the power she had always been destined to hold. The moment of freedom was both triumphant and bittersweet. Eleanor, free at last, could return to her family, to the very future she had long worked toward. Yet her return to power was not without its challenges. Her relationship with Henry had soured beyond repair. Though he had released her from captivity, his power was no longer absolute in her eyes. The political landscape had changed, and so had their relationship. Eleanor, once bound by the conventions of marriage and royalty, was now free to pursue her own ambitions, unencumbered by the restraints of her past life. She turned her focus to her sons, especially Richard, whose ambitions of military prowess had set him on the path to becoming a great king. With her guidance and support, Richard was able to challenge his father's authority, culminating in a rebellion that would see him crowned King of England. Eleanor's strategic maneuvering, even from the shadows, played a key role in Richard's ascent. She knew that the power of motherhood could be just as impactful as any political alliance, and her influence over her son proved to be a powerful force in the battle for England's throne. The voice, now reassuring, continues. The bonds of motherhood are not just emotional, they are political. Eleanor's bond with her children was not just one of love, but one of shared purpose. She had nurtured their ambitions, shaped their destinies, and now, through her son Richard, she would reclaim her rightful place in the world. The rebellion led by Richard became the turning point in Eleanor's life. As her son took the throne, Eleanor was no longer just a queen consort or a political pawn. She was a queen mother, wielding influence over both her son and the kingdom. Her role shifted from that of a prisoner to that of a matriarch, shaping the future of England with the wisdom and strength she had cultivated throughout her tumultuous life. With Richard's victory, Eleanor's legacy was secured. She had overcome every obstacle, betrayal, imprisonment, political challenges, and emerged not only as a mother but as a queen, whose influence extended far beyond the confines of her marriage or her reign. Her time in captivity had shown her that the real power lay not in holding a title, but in the ability to shape the future, to guide others, and to create lasting change. As Eleanor watched her son ascend to the throne, she knew that her own role was far from over. She had ensured Richard's reign, but she would continue to shape the course of English history in the years to come. Though her marriage to Henry had ended in betrayal, Eleanor's true power lay in her ability to adapt, to endure, and to leave a legacy that would outlast the generations that followed. As Eleanor's life unfolded, her role continued to evolve, but her impact remained undeniable. Now, as the mother of the King of England, her influence was both far-reaching and subtle, woven into the fabric of English politics and European affairs. Though she was no longer a ruling queen, she had become a queen mother, a position of immense power in its own right. Eleanor's legacy was no longer about reigning in her own right. It was about guiding the future through her children, particularly her son Richard, who had taken the throne. The voice, now slow and reflective, continues. Eleanor and her later years would come to be known not just for the power she held, but for the legacy she created. A queen by birth, a queen by marriage, but most importantly, a queen by the wisdom she passed down to her children. It was her ability to raise, to nurture, and to lead through others that would become her most significant contribution to history. Eleanor understood that power does not always need to be worn as a crown. It can live in the actions of those you influence, in the lives you shape. You can feel the weight of time as the voice continues, drawing you into the understanding of Eleanor's true role. She was not merely a queen who served a king. She was a queen who built a dynasty, one that would outlive the ages. Through her children, Eleanor's reach extended far beyond her lifetime. Richard's reign was just one chapter of a much larger story, a story of influence, resilience, and the unyielding determination to leave a mark on the world. Even as Eleanor grew older, her political acumen remained sharp. She used her position not just to secure her son's throne, but to guide him through the complexities of ruling a kingdom. The court, ever full of intrigue and treachery, was a world in which Eleanor had thrived for decades. And now, as Richard's advisor, she remained an integral part of his decision-making. Though she was no longer in power as she once had been, her counsel was invaluable, an unspoken strength that bolstered the young king's reign. The voice speaks gently, as if acknowledging the passage of time. Though Eleanor had passed through many roles in her life, daughter, wife, queen, she had come to understand something that many never did. The true power of a woman is not in what she holds, but in what she shapes, what she leaves behind. Eleanor did not rule with an iron fist. She ruled with wisdom, with strategy, and with a fierce love for her children, for the future. In her final years, Eleanor's legacy was evident in the kingdoms she helped to form and the heirs she had raised. Richard, now firmly seated on the throne, ruled with his mother's lessons in mind. His reign was marked by both the glory of conquest and the complexity of governance, a balance Eleanor had helped him navigate. Though their relationship had at times been fraught with tension, Eleanor's influence over Richard was undeniable. She had given him the tools to rule, and in turn, Richard gave her the respect and admiration she had long sought. The voice, now full of reverence, adds, Eleanor's legacy was more than just political. She had, over her lifetime, shaped the destiny of Europe. Her strength was in her ability to rise from adversity, her resilience in the face of immense personal and political challenges. But above all, it was her wisdom, passed from mother to son, from queen to king, that would continue to resonate in the halls of history long after she had gone. Eleanor, now in her later years, looked back on her life with a quiet satisfaction. Her journey was not one of simple triumphs or losses, but a continual ebb and flow of power, love, and sacrifice. She had shaped not just her own destiny, but the destinies of those around her, particularly her sons. As the years passed and the earth slowly wore away her footsteps, her legacy, like the foundations of a great castle, would endure, standing strong in the hearts and minds of those who followed her dot as the voice quiets. It offers one final reflection. Eleanor of Aquitaine may no longer walk the earth, but her story continues to live on in the dynasties she helped build, in the lessons she taught, and in the power of a woman who never stopped shaping the world. As Eleanor's final days approached, her influence remained undiminished, though the physical world she had known, the courts, the castles, the political intrigues began to fade into the distance. Her legacy continued to thrive, woven deeply into the very fabric of the future she had helped shape. Her sons, now firmly in their respective roles as rulers, carried the weight of her teachings in their hearts. Richard's reign as King of England, though marked by its own triumphs and struggles, was a reflection of the lessons Eleanor had imparted to him. The voice speaks softly, almost reverently, as though the passing of time itself must be respected. Legacy is not only measured by the years we live, but by the lives we touch and the influence we leave behind. Eleanor, though long gone, remained ever present in the hearts and minds of those who followed her, especially her sons. Richard, John, and the kingdoms they ruled carried with them her spirit, her unyielding will, and the understanding that power, while hard won, must always be wielded with wisdom, patience, and compassion. In the quiet of her final years, Eleanor often found herself reflecting on the long journey that had brought her to this point. From the young noblewoman, eager to make her mark on the world, to the powerful queen consort, and finally, to the queen mother who had shaped the very course of history, her life had been a continuous battle for influence. But as she sat in the peaceful solitude of her chambers, Eleanor found solace in knowing that she had succeeded, not just in claiming power, but in securing a lasting legacy that would outlive her. Her thoughts turned to her children, especially Richard. He had grown into a strong and capable ruler, his name echoing through the halls of history. His reign was marked by the same determination and ambition Eleanor had nurtured in him from a young age. The battles he fought, the alliances he made, were not just his own. They were the culmination of years of guidance, advice, and, at times, quiet rebellion against the constraints of his position. He had learned from her, not just in matters of politics, but in understanding the power of being a leader who commands respect, not through force, but through wisdom. The voice continues, its tone now filled with a sense of closure. Eleanor's legacy was not just the land she helped govern or the crown she had worn. It was the vision she had instilled in her sons, a vision that transcended the realms of kings and queens, touching the very nature of what it meant to lead. Leadership, Eleanor had always believed, was not about control, it was about influence, strategy, and understanding the delicate balance between power and compassion. As Eleanor's health began to wane, the court around her continued to bustle with life, new kings, new alliances, new challenges, but her part in it had concluded. She was now a figure of history, her name etched into the annals of time as one of the most influential women of her era. Yet her spirit remained, not in the form of a monarch sitting on a throne, but in the quiet legacy of her children, who continued to shape the future she had helped create. In the end, the voice. Muses, Eleanor was not defined by her title or her crown. She was defined by her actions, her decisions, and the legacy she left behind. A woman of strength, intelligence, and determination, she had built a world in which power could be wielded not only by kings but by queens, not only by men but by those who understood that true strength lies in the ability to influence the future rather than simply dominate the present. Eleanor's story was no longer just a tale of royal ambition and political maneuvering. It had become a story of resilience, of a woman who defied the limitations of her time and carved out a place for herself in the pages of history. Her life was a testament to the fact that even in a world where power was often defined by birthright and gender, it was possible to break free from those constraints and leave a legacy that would endure as the stars began to shine more brightly in the night sky, and the earth beneath her continued to pulse with the rhythm of life. Eleanor closed her eyes one last time, at peace with the world she had helped shape. The legacy of her actions, her wisdom, and her strength would live on, carried through the generations by the men and women she had guided. Her story was not just one of royalty, it was the story of a woman who had shaped the course of history, and in doing so had secured her place in the eternal dance of time. As the years moved on and Eleanor's life began to wind down, her mind often drifted back to the choices she had made, the paths she had taken, and the legacy she had built. Now, surrounded by the fading echoes of the courts and the whispers of past battles, she knew that her life had not been lived in vain. Her reign as queen had been tumultuous, her marriage filled with both passion and strife, but it had also been marked by a determination to shape the world in her image, a determination that had carved out her place in history. The voice speaks softly, like a gentle breeze, carrying the weight of time. In the end, Eleanor came to understand that her true power did not lie in the title she had held, nor in the kingdom she had helped rule. It was not in the grand battles she had fought, nor in the political intrigue that surrounded her. It lay in her ability to shape those who would come after her children, her legacy, and the future they would inherit. Eleanor's final reflections were filled with both pride and humility. She had spent a lifetime navigating the dangerous waters of politics, of love, of power, and of sacrifice. She had ruled, fought, and endured, but most of all, she had shaped the futures of those around her. She thought of Richard, now powerful king, leading England with the same passion and determination that had defined her own reign. And she thought of John, who had always been more cunning and strategic, carving out his own path in the shadows of his older brother. Both of her sons were reflections of her own ambitions, each carrying forward the lessons she had imparted to them, each leaving their own mark on the world. The voice continues, its tone growing warmer. Eleanor's children were not just her legacy, they were the embodiment of everything she had strived for. Richard had inherited her strength, her courage, and her capacity for leadership, while John, in his own way, carried her cunning, her political intelligence, and her unwavering determination. Eleanor had taught them both not just how to rule, but how to survive in a world where power was the greatest currency. But as Eleanor lay in her final days, she knew that the world she had fought so hard to build would continue without her. The kingdoms of England and France, once divided by conflict and rivalry, were now united in a way that she had helped engineer. She had not just been a queen. She had been a mother, a strategist, and a force of nature who had bent the political landscape to her will. Her influence, though subtle at times, had been the foundation upon which the future of Europe had been built. Her last thoughts were not of regret, but of fulfillment. She had achieved everything she had set out to do. Her influence had shaped her sons, and through them it would shape the future. The future of England, of Europe, had been set in motion by the choices she had made. And that, more than any title or crown, was her true legacy. The voice now speaks one final time, as if guiding you gently through the end of this journey. Eleanor's life was not one of simplicity. It was one of complexity, of power and love, of triumphs and sacrifices. She was a woman who defied the conventions of her time, who rose above the limitations placed upon her by society, and who, in the end, left a legacy that would echo through the ages. Though her body may have aged, her spirit remained as strong as ever. Her influence, like the kings and queens who followed her, would continue long after her passing, carried through the actions of her children and the worlds they built. Eleanor's eyes closed, the weight of a life well lived lifting from her shoulders. The legacy of her name, the wisdom she imparted, and the strength of her character will live on, not just in history books, but in the lives of those she touched, as the quiet murmur of time continues its unbroken rhythm. Eleanor of Aquitaine's place in the eternal cycle of history is assured. As Eleanor's life drew to a close, her mind often wandered back to the winding path she had walked. She thought of the battles fought, both on the battlefield and in the courts, the many moments of triumph, and the struggles that had shaped her into the woman she had become. Yet, as the end of her journey approached, she found peace in knowing that her life had left an indelible mark on the world. Her legacy was no longer just her reign, her marriage, or even her political savvy. It was the enduring influence she had on those around her, particularly her children and the kingdoms they had helped shape. The voice, now soft yet filled with an undeniable strength, continues. What we leave behind is not measured by the wealth or titles we amass in our lifetime, but by the impact we have on the people we love and the world we shape. Eleanor knew that the true measure of her life lay not in the crown she had worn, nor in the power she had commanded. It was in the hearts of her children, the future she had helped to carve, and the wisdom she had passed down to them. As Eleanor lay in her final moments, the kingdom around her seemed quieter, more subdued. The courts, once filled with the noise of political intrigue and power struggles, had shifted. Her sons, Richard and John, now had their own kingdoms to rule, and while their paths were different, the lessons she had taught them were clear. Richard, bold and resolute, had inherited her strength and courage. John, more subtle and ambitious, carried with him her intelligence and political cunning. Eleanor had not just been their mother, she had been their guide, their mentor, and their greatest supporter. The voice pauses for a moment, allowing the weight of Eleanor's journey to sink in. Her children, those she had raised and nurtured, would carry her influence forward. They were the bearers of her legacy, each ruling in their own right, each shaping the world in their own way, but always with the memory of their mother guiding them. Eleanor's legacy was not just a political one, but a deeply personal one, rooted in the strength of her family and the values she had instilled in her sons. Even in her absence, her teachings would continue to echo through the halls of power. In the quiet solitude of her final days, Eleanor could sense the quiet hum of time moving forward. The world she had once fought so fiercely to shape was now in the hands of her children, though the details of her reign would eventually fade. From the history books, the principles she had lived by, the principles of resilience, strategic thinking, and the unyielding drive to build a lasting legacy would endure. Her final thoughts were not filled with regret, but with a profound sense of peace. Eleanor had accomplished what she had set out to do. She had raised kings, shaped nations, and forever altered the political landscape of Europe. Through her children, her legacy would continue to live on, influencing generations to come. And as her eyes closed one final time, she knew that her story, though coming to an end, would remain forever written into the tapestry of history. The voice now speaks, gentle and final. Eleanor of Aquitaine's legacy is not just in the title she once held, nor in the power she commanded. Her true legacy lies in the lives she touched, the kingdoms she helped to shape, and the future she helped to create. She was a woman who defied expectations, who broke through the barriers of her time, and who, through her determination and intellect, build a lasting influence that will echo through the centuries. Though her body has passed, her spirit, her wisdom, and her strength live on in the hearts of her children, in the kingdoms they shaped, and in the enduring mark she left on the world. As the stars glistened brightly overhead and the winds whispered softly through the castle halls, Eleanor's legacy remained a beacon of hope, strength, and wisdom. Her story was not just one of a queen, but of a mother, a strategist, and a leader who had shaped history, not just through the titles she held, but through the lasting impact she left on the world. As Eleanor's life gently came to its close, the world outside the palace continued its steady march forward. The kingdom that had once seemed so vast, filled with power and intrigue, now felt quieter, its heart beating in the hands of the men and women she had shaped. Eleanor, in her final moments, had the peace of knowing that her influence had not only withstood the tests of time, but had grown with each passing year. The legacy she left behind was not confined to the titles she had worn or the power she had wielded, but to the lasting impact she had on the world she had helped create. The voice speaks softly, as though the weight of time itself carries the message. Legacy is a curious thing. It is not a monument built from stone, nor a crown placed on one's head. Legacy is found in the lives touched, the hearts changed, the paths altered. Eleanor of Aquitaine had built an empire not in lands, but in influence, not in wealth, but in wisdom. Her greatest gift was not the kingdom she ruled, but the future she shaped through her family, her children, and the world she had left in their hands. As the years turned, Eleanor's name continued to echo in the halls of history. Her sons, Richard and John, carried forward the values she had instilled in them. Richard, known as Richard the Lionheart, embodied his mother's strength and resolve. He fought battles, led armies, and became one of the most legendary figures in English history. John, though more subtle in his ambitions, carried her intelligence and political savvy into his own reign, though history would later remember him less favorably. But it was not their reigns alone that ensured Eleanor's legacy. It was the lessons they carried forward, the wisdom that she had passed on, and the mark she had left on their hearts. The voice continues, almost as a whisper, Eleanor's. Life was not without hardship or sacrifice, but in the end, it was the love for her children, the bonds she forged through her wisdom, and her unwavering belief in the importance of legacy that defined her. She had not just shaped kings, she had shaped the future, and through her children, her legacy continued to reverberate through history. As long as England and France stood, so too would her influence. The final years of Eleanor's life were spent in peace, surrounded by her family and the land she had fought so hard to protect. Though her body grew frail with age, her mind remained sharp, still advising her children, still sharing the wisdom that had guided her through a lifetime of political struggle. But as the seasons changed, so too did the world. The young kings she had raised now ruled in their own right, their actions shaping the world for generations to come. And as Eleanor lay upon her deathbed, she reflected not on the power she had once wielded, but on the future that she had secured for her children and for Europe. She had given them the tools to rule, the strength to endure, and the wisdom to lead. In that moment, Eleanor knew that her work was complete. Her legacy was not just in the battles fought or the crowns worn, but in the lasting impact she had on the course of history, the lives she touched, and the lessons she passed on to those who came after her. The voice lowers to a quiet, reverent tone. Eleanor's story is not one of endings, but of beginnings, of a life that did not fade, but instead lived on through the generations she helped shape. Her name would remain, carried on the winds of time, in the actions of her children, in the echoes of her wisdom, and in the hearts of all those who sought to lead with strength, compassion, and a vision for the future. Eleanor's legacy would never fade, for it was woven into the very fabric of history. And with that, as the final breath of Eleanor left her body, the world continued its endless cycle. The kingdom she had shaped would continue to change, as would the lives of those who followed her. But in the heart of history, Eleanor of Aquitaine's story would forever remain timeless, unyielding and powerful dot as the years slipped by. The winds of time carried with them the legacy of Eleanor of Aquitaine, her name etched into the annals of history as one of the most influential women of the medieval world. Though she was no longer physically present, her impact continued to ripple across Europe, reaching beyond the confines of her own family and spreading through the very fabric of the political landscape she had so carefully woven. Her children, Richard and John, each in their own way, carried forth her teachings, her ambition, and her strength, ensuring that her legacy would be felt for generations to come. The voice speaks softly, as though reflecting on the nature of true influence. What Eleanor knew, perhaps better than anyone, was that legacy is not built upon the deeds of one single person, nor upon titles or wealth. It is built upon the ripples one creates in the world, the lessons passed down, the relationships formed, and the future shaped through those who come after. Eleanor had given birth to kings, but more importantly, she had given birth to a vision of a world where women could wield power, where influence was not simply inherited, but earned through wisdom, courage, and determination. Richard, her firstborn, carried the spirit of his mother with him into every battle he fought. Known to history as Richard the Lionheart, his reign was marked by bravery and military prowess, but it was also shaped by the lessons Eleanor had instilled in him: to never back down from a challenge, to always fight for what was just, and to never underestimate the power of strategic thinking. While Richard may not have been the perfect king, Eleanor's influence was unmistakable in the way he led his army and ruled his kingdom. The voice continues with a sense of nostalgia. Richard's reign was a testament to his mother's resilience, but also to the deep bond they shared. Even in the face of war and political strife, Eleanor's wisdom lingered in his decisions. She had taught him to never see himself as simply a pawn in the games of power. He was a player, a king in his own right, but also a product of his mother's vision and ambition. John, her younger son, may have taken a different path, but his rise to power was no less influenced by Eleanor's teachings, though history would later cast John in a less favorable light. It was Eleanor who had shaped his understanding of politics and governance. While Richard fought on the front lines, John navigated the shadows of court life, maneuvering his way through alliances and betrayals with a sharpness that had been honed by his mother's sharp intellect. The voice reflects thoughtfully: John may not have been the king his mother had hoped he would become, but Eleanor's influence was undeniable in his cunning and ambition. In a world dominated by men, she had taught her sons to fight for power in whatever way they could, to never back down, and to always hold on to the reins of control. Eleanor had forged them into rulers, each in their own way. But Eleanor's legacy was not limited to her sons alone. She had shaped the course of European history through the alliances she forged, the marriages she arranged, and the wisdom she passed down to those who would rule after her. Her influence reached far beyond the walls of her court, leaving an imprint on the generations that followed. She had shown Europe what it meant for a woman to hold power, and though her time had passed, the blueprint she created would endure. The voice grows almost reverential. Through her children, through her alliances, and through her wisdom, Eleanor of Aquitaine left a mark on Europe that would never fade. The queens, princesses, and rulers who followed her took with them the lessons she had imparted, that power is not given, but earned, and that a woman's influence is just as potent as any man's, if not more so. As time moved forward, Eleanor's name became legend, and her story was told and retold across generations. Her legacy, though not always visible in the direct line of monarchs that followed her, was felt in the power of women to come, in the ability to break through the barriers of their time, and in the quiet strength that shaped the course of history. The voice, now filled with a sense of finality, adds, Eleanor may have passed from this world, but her story continues. Through the centuries, her influence has only grown. She remains not just a figure of history, but a symbol of what it means to rise above the limits of one's time, to carve out a legacy not through brute force, but through wisdom, resilience, and the courage to shape the future. As the world continues to turn, as kings and queens rise and fall, Eleanor's legacy lives on, whispered through the corridors of history, carried in the hearts of those who, like her, dare to dream of a world beyond the one they were born into. As the centuries passed, the world changed, but Eleanor of Aquitaine's legacy remained steadfast. Her story, once told only in the royal courts of medieval Europe, became a legend that transcended time, a tale passed down through generations. The lessons she taught: the power of intelligence, the importance of resilience, and the necessity of shaping one's destiny, became a cornerstone in the history of leadership. Eleanor's name, though fading from daily conversation, was inscribed in the hearts of those who understood the intricacies of power, ambition, and sacrifice. The voice, slow and deliberate, continues. Eleanor's legacy is not confined to the pages of history books or the annals of monarchs. Her influence transcended the royal bloodlines and reached into the very fabric of European civilization. She was more than a queen. She was a pioneer, a woman who broke boundaries not just as a ruler, but as a symbol of what was possible when women dared to wield power, when they demanded respect in a world that sought to silence them. Her name lives on because she defied the limits of her time. Her impact was most evident in the generations that followed her, particularly in the role of women in power. Though many of her direct descendants did not hold the same power she once had, Eleanor's life inspired countless others to rise above the constraints placed on them by society and to carve out their own paths of influence. Her story became a source of strength for those who believed that their potential was limitless, that they, too, could shape the world around them. Eleanor's legacy was also reflected in the political system she helped shape, the alliances she forged, and the kingdoms she influenced. The lands she had once ruled and navigated: Aquitaine, France, England, continued to evolve, but the lessons she imparted were immortal. The notion that a woman could be both a mother and a queen, a lover and a leader, would resonate through history, challenging the boundaries of what was possible for women in power. The voice, now softer and filled with a sense of reverence, reflects. Eleanor's legacy is not confined to the bloodline she left behind, nor to the kingdoms she helped shape. It is reflected in the quiet resilience of women who have risen to power in a world that has often sought to silence them. It is reflected in the countless women who, inspired by her story, have walked into the world and demanded their own seat at the table, who have carried her lessons with them into leadership roles across generations. Eleanor of Aquitaine's legacy, though forged in the medieval courts and in the turbulent politics of her time, now exists beyond the realms of history. She remains to this day a symbol of strength and wisdom, a woman who reshaped the boundaries of power and legacy. In every woman who rises to a position of leadership, in every child who looks to their mother as their greatest teacher, Eleanor's influence continues to echo through the ages. Her name lives on, the voice concludes softly, not just in history, but in the stories of every woman who refuses to be silenced, every person who dares to take their destiny into their own hands. Eleanor of Aquitaine is not just a relic of the past. She is a beacon for the future. As the story of Eleanor fades into the timeless rhythm of history, her spirit remains a steady, unwavering force. A queen who transcended her time, Eleanor's life continues to resonate in the hearts of those who remember her, not just as a queen of Aquitaine, but as a queen of the ages.